Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 4 preview where we'll discuss which players you should be looking to buy, which players you should be looking to sell, wildcard strategy and much more. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, I think a lot of people will be targeting Brighton assets for this week due to having back-to-back fixtures against Ipswich and Nottingham Forest. And also, from an attacking perspective, I don't mind the fixtures for the next 5 or 6 weeks. Don't get completely bogged down by the fixture difficulty rating. And obviously, teams aren't going to have a perfect fixture every week. But I really don't mind the investment in Brighton for the next 4 to 5 game weeks. So whether you're looking to wildcard in 6 or not, I understand the desire to go out there and get a Brighton, especially attacker, but also the defenders aren't awful either. And we will discuss later in today's video the best £4.5 million defenders, of which Dunk and Van Hecke are on there. I just wanted to say you can still get 50% off from Fantasy Football Hub at the moment, and I have been informed that this will be ending very soon. I'll just show you how easy it is to get the data in these videos. So let's say you just want to look at Brighton players. You can just type in Brighton. You've got all of the stats for all of the players. You can also make your own custom table. So I've got my own custom table with the non-penalty expected goals. You can switch per 90, per appearance. It's so easy. You can go by the season as well if you want to look at what their data was like last season. And we will do that in a second for Wissa and Mbeumo last year. Or you can just make it nice and simple and just go on like player comparison and just say I want to compare Minte and I want to compare Mitoma because I'm not sure who I want to bring in. And there's just loads of stuff that you can get. So honestly, so worth it. I've said this so many times, but it works out £3.25 per month if you sign up to the annual subscription. I would highly recommend it. Might as well do it now whilst you can get 50% off. It does support me, of course. But it's just something like I couldn't imagine doing fantasy football without it now. Like the fixture analyzer, you got points predictions. There is just so much on the site. So do check it out. There will be a link down below in the description. But back to the point of this section, which is to discuss Brighton. I really like a lot of their assets. I've narrowed it down to 7 here that I would be considering. You've got Verbruggen, Dunk, Van Hecke. I thought it was Van Hecke, by the way. Apparently it's Van Hecke. But Minte, Welbeck, João Pedro, and Mitoma. So you've got 4 attackers, 2 defenders, and a goalkeeper. Just very briefly on Verbruggen, I think he's a great option to pick up. I did discuss in the FPL therapy episode yesterday with Fran. And by the way, if you've not yet seen that episode, do go and check it out. That is my new podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. But we discussed that actually the idea of like Verbruggen and Flecken, whilst we wouldn't normally recommend you spend that much money on keepers, it's the equivalent of having Emi Martinez and a 4 million goalkeeper. And with Verbruggen then Flecken, you get the next 2 home fixtures for Verbruggen, and then you can bring in Flecken, who's got great fixtures from Game Week 6. And actually Flecken and Verbruggen don't rotate awfully. So I don't mind that. And it does look like Verbruggen will be first choice. Lots of people wondering, is there a chance Still comes back in? There is. But what Hertzler basically came out and said is, I will have a number 1 this season. He made that very clear. And like 3 days after he said, I will be having only 1 number 1 this season, Verbruggen comes back into the starting 11 and plays obviously 90 minutes. So by all accounts, if he's saying I've got 1 number 1, and to that point Still had started every game, well, if he continues to start Still, then you say he's the number 1. But the fact that Verbruggen comes straight in, I'm fairly confident that Verbruggen is first choice number 1, and as a result, he's good. He'll make saves. Brighton are perfect in terms of they're not the best defence in the league, but they are good enough that they won't concede a ton of chances, but also slightly weaker in the sense that they'll still concede shots. Because the issue you've had with the likes of Edison and Raya in the past is when a defence are too good, the goalkeeper doesn't make enough saves. So yeah, really like Verbruggen. I have absolutely no issues with him. He's probably my second favourite £4.5 million goalkeeper after Flecken. Then on the defenders, absolutely Lewis Dunk would be my favoured centre-back or defender over Van Hecke, but they're both fine for 4.5 million. They're both as nailed as each other. You can see here that they're both going to pretty much start and get 90 in most games. Just with Lewis Dunk, what you have, I think, is attacking much more goal threat. He's just so good from corners. And also in this system, we'll have to wait and see if it continues, but Hertzler does like his centre-backs to carry the ball forward and also create for him. He's spoken about that in the past. And Lewis Dunk created 3 chances in the Arsenal game. Now, that was, of course, against 10 men, and whether that will continue in other games, we'll have to wait and see. But I just fancy Lewis Dunk to get more attacking returns. And for me, Dunk would be right up there as one of my favoured £4.5 million defenders. So again, in terms of Dunk and Van Hecke, both are fine. You could just maybe go for a slightly more differential option in Van Hecke. But I think both are nailed. Both are really good. And I would have absolutely no issue, especially on a wildcard, going for one of these. But if you're looking for a short-term transfer, you need a defender, and maybe you are looking to wildcard in Game Week 6. Both of these are absolutely fine. The real discussion, though, is around Minte, Welbeck, João Pedro, and Mitoma. And I guess the first thing to talk about is the international break. Now, some people think we are overdoing this slightly by talking about players being away on the international break with their national team, and maybe we are. But there is something to be said. For some players have literally only just played their last international game on early Wednesday morning, and I'm looking there at João Pedro, and then Brighton play again on Saturday. So let's say that they literally get a private jet first thing back to the UK. João Pedro, for example, is travelling back from Paraguay. He's not going to get back until probably late on Wednesday, or even sort of mid to early sort of evening on Wednesday. Yes, he could then train on Thursday, but then he's had no real recovery day. And I know these travel experiences that they have on these private jets, you can recover, but you will know, even if you've travelled luxury, there is still some element of you need a recovery day where you're not on a plane and you have the ability to go and get a massage and recover. And these players aren't just going to go straight back into training. So I would question if someone like a João Pedro, Luis Diaz, who's been away with Colombia, if they even do train on the Thursday. So what you're saying is they might only get 1, maximum 2 training sessions before they play on the Saturday. And I know it's early on in the season, so maybe that won't matter. Maybe they are so fit right now because they've not played that many minutes yet that won't be an issue. But I just question whether it will be. It's not even to do with how much game time they've had over the international break. It is the travel. It is the jet lag. It's the different time zones. So I do have questions. The thing that I would say with Brighton is a lot of the players are away on international duty and a lot of them are travelling long distances. So to recap, Mitoma is away with Japan. He played on the Tuesday and he got a decent amount of minutes. He's then obviously got to travel back from Asia, I believe. João Pedro is away with Brazil. He played early Wednesday morning and he's got to travel back from, I think, again, it's Paraguay, which is quite a long flight. Lots of people were saying, well, João Pedro won't play anyway. João Pedro did play 45 minutes in the second game. He came on for, I think, Endrick at half-time. Didn't play in the first game. So he's not got a massive amount of minutes. But he is playing the latest in the international break, and he's got to travel almost the furthest. But on top of Mitoma and João Pedro being away, Adingra is also away with the Ivory Coast. You've got Jorginho Ruta, who is away with the France under-21s. So a lot of the players that could play potentially instead of João Pedro, they are also travelling, and some of them are also playing quite late. Like Adingra is playing on the Tuesday as well, played on the Tuesday. So that might have been a really confusing section. I just wanted to say that there is some concern around Brighton in terms of a lot of their players are playing late in the international break. How might that affect their performance overall? We don't know. But on top of that, is someone like a João Pedro going to go and get 90 minutes? Maybe less sure than I would have been if he obviously hadn't been away. 2 players that I think are more likely to get good minutes as a result is firstly Danny Welbeck, who has not been away on international duty and as a result should be feeling nice and fresh. And also Minte, his only game was a little bit earlier with Gambia than a lot of the other players. So he still went away on international duty, don't get me wrong, but he didn't play the 2 games and his most recent game was a few days ago now. So I think overall, I would be pretty sure of a start for Minte and Welbeck. Outside of that, you could see a little bit more rotation, and you might not see the likes of João Pedro and Mitoma getting 90 minutes as a result. Let's wait and see what Hertzler says. Maybe you're just thinking, Ross, you are massively overthinking this. João Pedro's nice and fit. He's travelling first class, probably on a private jet. He's going to get back to Brighton middle of Wednesday. He'll have Thursday to train and Friday. He's absolutely fine. If you think that, that's absolutely fine. But I want to just give you all of the information and say that I think there's a chance that someone like a João Pedro maybe only gets 60 to 70 minutes in this game. And if that's the case, maybe someone like a Welbeck, regardless of data, might be a better option, because I think for a lot of people that are looking to own Brighton assets now, they are maybe thinking about a wildcard in game week 6 or 7. So if it is short term and the best fixture that they've got is this week, maybe consider minutes based on the international break. But in terms of what we've seen from them so far this season, all 4 of them have been fantastic. They've all got pretty decent underlying data. Mitoma and Minte have the best underlying data thus far this season. Obviously, they are midfielders as well. They get the extra point for a goal. they get the extra point for a clean sheet. So I have my eye on Minte and Mitoma. I think they're brilliant value, taking a decent amount of shots as well. In terms of who has the weakest underlying data so far, it is João Pedro at 0.4. He's actually struggled a little bit in terms of the quantity of chances and also the quality of chances that other players have had here. Right, in terms of big chances, but in terms of the amount of shots he's taken, he's not necessarily like outperforming all of them like we maybe would have expected. But what we've got from João Pedro thus far, eye test wise, he's been brilliant. He's performing very well. The manager's speaking very highly. He's also got really good minutes thus far. He's got the joint most out of all of the attackers with Mitoma, and he's also got penalties, we believe. And I think when you put that all together, better minutes, penalties, passing the eye test, extremely important to the system that Hertzler is playing. João Pedro is still a brilliant pick. And I think if we think João Pedro is likely to start in Game Week 4 and get good minutes, I still think João Pedro, for me, is the standout option of the Brighton attackers. But this, to me, going away with Brazil, maybe not getting perfect minutes in Game Week 4, the underlying data actually not being as strong as some of the other players, it also suggests to me that João Pedro isn't like an obvious pick that you have to go out and get. So many people are saying like, it's João Pedro or no one. No, I think Minte, Welbeck and Mitoma are really, really solid. And if you were to tell me now, based on everything that I've just told you, the underlying data being good for Welbeck, he's not away on international duty, I want to go out there and get Welbeck instead of João Pedro for Game Week 4, I would not talk a single person out of it. The most shots of all of these attackers, decent underlying data. He's got really good minutes as well himself so far, and he should be having very good minutes in Game Week 4. By all accounts, Welbeck is a seriously good option. And on a wildcard, by the way, I don't mind two of these attackers, a Welbeck and a Minte, or even a Welbeck and a João Pedro alongside an Erling Haaland. So there we go. I've spoken about Brighton assets for far too long. I think they're really good. I myself have my eye on all four of those attackers. And if I was on a wild card, I would be having at least two Brighton assets. Let me know down below, going into Game Week 4, do you have interest in Brighton or are you just going to avoid? So guys, a few questions came in around Eberechi Eze, but also Wissa and Mbeumo. So I sort of thought I would discuss them all together because someone asked a very interesting comment, and that is, as I'm sure many are also considering Eze to Mbeumo in Game Week 6, I think a lot of people will, given that it becomes the end of the really good fixture run for Palace, but also the start of a really nice fixture run for Brentford, and they're at that similar price. So yeah, Eze to Mbeumo in Game Week 6 will be very popular, or on Wildcard, I think a lot of people look to drop Eze and they'll bring Mbeumo in for that price point. So this person said, would an alternative of Wissa give around the same return whilst also being able to keep Eze for his run? So basically, if you can't afford Mbeumo or you want to keep Eze but also get a Brentford attacker, does Wissa stand up to Mbeumo as an FPL option? And there are multiple things to unpack here, such as firstly, is Wissa an okay alternative to Mbeumo? Is it one or the other, or should it be both? But also, like, how much do you want to keep Eze? Because if Eze is not that, if you're not that desperate to keep him, well, then this doesn't really matter at all. So firstly, on Eze, before we look at the comparison between Wissa and Mbeumo, I absolutely think he's a good option to keep because the same things apply that applied in Game Week 1, which made Eze such a good pick for so many of us. I actually think, firstly, the fixtures, I'll just read them out. So Leicester, United, Everton across the next three. So in Game Week 6, he's got Everton, who haven't looked perfect defensively. Yes, he then has Liverpool, but after that, it's Forest, Spurs, Wolves, and Fulham. Spurs and Fulham being at home. Those are good. Like, the good fixtures actually don't really run out for Crystal Palace. Yes, that Liverpool game's not ideal, but he's a penalty taker, we think anyway, again. His minutes are good, and Palace will score goals. So if you have to start him in one suboptimal fixture, it's not the end of the world. So yeah, the fixtures are there, and everything applies. Like I said, the data's always good. The minutes are good. I think Palace will start to improve attacking-wise, but maybe if they don't, that's something to consider. And he's just an exceptionally gifted footballer. The goal that he actually scored in Game Week 3, it was his worst overall performance in terms of underlying data, but he can just give you something out of nothing. Along with the set pieces, he's just got so many routes to points. So yes, in an ideal world, I will be looking to have Eze from Game Week 6 onwards. And therefore, yes, having Wissa, still having a Brentford attacker, but being able to keep Eze sounds great. But I think for me, I would want Eze, Mbeumo, and Wissa. I don't know that I would want Wissa instead of Mbeumo. But does he match up as an asset? Yes, he does. So what I've actually got here, hopefully this isn't too confusing for you, but I'll just explain what this sort of table is. I've got Mbeumo's data on the left-hand side, Wissa's data on the right-hand side, and I've got their 24-25 data, which is this season across the first 3 game weeks, and then I've got their 23-24 data. And what the green and red arrow basically means is if it's a green arrow, it means they're performing better over the first 3 games this season than they did last season. If it's a red arrow, it means they are performing worse in that category this season in comparison to last season. So as you can see immediately, Wissa is up on every single underlying statistic we're looking at this season, including minutes, and then Mbeumo is up on a lot of them, but is down slightly on goal threat and expected FPL points. So by all accounts, they are both performing very well in terms of their underlying data. The minutes last season weren't perfect for either. I just think they're so critical to their teams, though. They should start pretty much every game, but you would absolutely say that Mbeumo is the more nailed asset in terms of is he likely to start every game. Wissa could see the odd game on the bench, but also I think Mbeumo's more likely to stay on. We saw it so many points last season. Whilst he did get a few early subs, he was still on there scoring goals in like the 95th, 96th minute. So in terms of nailedness and minutes, I think they're both very good, but definitely Mbeumo edges it there. In terms of overall goal threat, I actually think Wissa has more goal threat than Mbeumo. I'm not saying whether I think he'll finish more and score more, but in terms of the amount of chances he gets, look at the data. Last season, Wissa had 0.38 non-penalty expected goals. Mbeumo had 0.33. This season, Mbeumo's got 0.3, which is still okay, by the way, but a very small drop-off in a small sample size, of course. Wissa's up at 0.73, and he has had a couple of, like, when I say big chances, like 0.9 XG chance he had, so maybe that has skewed it, but nothing here suggests to me that Mbeumo is more likely to get more goal-scoring opportunities from open play. So, for me, goal threat-wise, as long as you don't think that Mbeumo is a significantly better finisher than Wissa, I would expect them to finish on roughly the same number of goals this season based on everything I can see here. In terms of creativity, there is a bit of a difference here. Mbeumo is very creative, and this is what I like about him. Not only does he have the pens and the goal threat and the minutes and all of this stuff, he's also extremely creative and he'll get you assists. So every 4 games, this suggests, he'll get you roughly 1 assist, which is really good across the season. That just adds so many extra points for him. Also on top of that, obviously the big chance involvement is a little bit higher for Bryan Mbeumo. He just gets involved in a lot. Obviously the penalties help that as well. So overall, when I look at this, I think they're extremely similar assets. Wissa's got slightly greater goal threat, and Mbeumo has the assist threat, but it doesn't really stop there for me because Mbeumo is a midfielder. So immediately you get an extra point for a goal and an extra point for a clean sheet. So across the season, and I'm not saying you would own them across the season, but if Brentford get 8 clean sheets, that's 8 extra points there. If Mbeumo scores 8 to 10 goals, that's an extra 8 to 10 points there. So we're already looking at an extra 16 plus points just by being a midfielder. And so that is a massive advantage. Then when you take into account the minutes are slightly better, yes, their per 90 data might look similar, but if Mbeumo's more likely to get closer to 90 minutes, that's an advantage. And also the penalties and also set pieces, it's just like Mbeumo's got so many routes to points. Goal threat, creativity, set pieces, penalties, minutes, everything just appears to be slightly better. Plus him being a midfielder, I think, is nicer. So for me, no, Wissa is not as good of an asset as Bryan Mbeumo. But is it close? Yes, it is. Then you also do need to consider that Mbeumo is a midfielder and Wissa is a forward. So some of you might not need a midfielder, and this comes back to the same point. It's difficult to squeeze all of these midfielders in. You might have a free slot in the attack at around 6 to 6.5 million. And if you do, Wissa is such a fantastic option. I would go as far as saying, fixtures aside, Wissa might be my favourite £6.1 million forward, or my favourite forward at that price. I might even prefer him to a João Pedro. The issue is that the next 2 fixtures aren't ideal, so you are probably looking at around a game week 6. And then, at that point, I'd say he's my favourite. I myself right now am looking at, if I am to wildcard in 6, or maybe game week 7, I'm probably looking at trying to squeeze both of these Brentford assets in, because I just think they're both very good in their own right. So there we go. Hopefully that's helpful. To answer your question, yes, absolutely, you could keep it as a go without Mbeumo and go for Wissa instead. But I don't think that Wissa should be seen as an alternative to Mbeumo. I think you should consider them as separate assets. They are both brilliant in their own right. It depends if you need a midfielder. It depends if you need a forward. And it also depends how many clean sheets you think Brentford will get, how many penalties you think Mbeumo will get. And that will start to help you decide how you compare these 2 assets. I'd love to know down below, is anyone moving for Mbeumo or Wissa this week, or are you waiting until game week 6? So guys, a lot of questions came in around the best £4.5 million defenders. I'm going to assume this is either people needing to make a transfer due to some sort of like Lewis Hall, Quansah issue in their team, or maybe for those on Wildcard. But I think it's important to think about at the moment, because if you are trying to squeeze in Salah and Haaland and maybe a Palmer and a Trent, etc., you're probably going to need to start maybe as many as two £4.5 million defenders, and then probably have a third on the bench. And in the wildcard drafts that I've built this week, I've had three £4.5 million-ish defenders, and I am aware that a lot of these aren't 4.5, they may be 4.6 or 4.7, but it's around that price tag. So here we go. Here are my favourites. I'll start with Quansah and Pau Torres. I don't actually like these particularly as picks, given that they don't have much upside and Villa aren't the best defence. But when I look overall across the next 4 to 5 weeks, which team has the best fixtures? For me, it's Aston Villa. And then when I look at the rest of the other defenders you can choose from, none of them really, other than Lewis, play for fantastic defences. And yes, some of them have attacking threat, but then they really don't have much clean sheet potential, such as maybe like a Davis or even a Robinson. So when I look at it overall, no, they're not particularly exciting, but because of the fixtures and because Villa aren't an awful defence, the clean sheet possibility is there. I know people point to the fact that Quansah obviously went off for England in their final international game. It looked like at first that he rolled his ankle, but I've seen a few reports that it wasn't actually the leg that he rolled his ankle for that was being treated. It was the other leg, which was kicked in the shin. Obviously, let's just wait and see what Unai Emery says, but as long as Quansah's fine, I think I would probably still opt for Quansah. But Pau Torres is a brilliant alternative, and I have no issue with him. I would say they're extremely similar. Neither of them have much goal threat. They're both very nailed. Bonus points-wise, there's not a lot to separate them. Maybe you just go for a Pau Torres rather than a Quansah. I think that's absolutely fine. And no, it's not exciting, but I would be slightly concerned if Villa don't manage to keep at least one clean sheet in the next 3 to 4 weeks, given their fixtures. So for me, Quansah and Pau Torres just about on top. After that, I would go for Dunk and Van Hecker. And the only reason that Dunk wouldn't be ahead of Quansah and Pau Torres, because he's got more attacking threat, is just that the fixtures aren't as good slightly longer term. I like the next two, but after that, sort of 3, 4, and 5 beyond that, I don't see many clean sheet possibilities for Brighton. So if it's more of a short-term punt, or you feel like you can rotate that player in and out, Lewis Dunk for me is fantastic, or a Van Hecker, but if you needed to start them every week, he just can't make his way in there instead of Quansah or Pau for me. Then I've got Lewis in third. Lewis is a tricky one, because is Walker eventually going to come back into that right-back spot? People have been like roasting me on TikTok and Instagram because I said Walker might come back in for Lewis. I am fully aware, by the way, Walker will not play the same role as Lewis. Lewis is essentially playing like a right central midfielder as part of a diamond. Right? I'm very aware where Lewis is playing. But in terms of from setup, if anyone comes in for Lewis, it is a Kanji or Walker as a right back. And then obviously in possession, the team can structure themselves however they want. But so, like Rodri's not going to come in for Lewis because in out of possession, they've not got a right back. So it would be probably Walker coming in. But what that would mean is a complete system change for Pep. Because they're not playing the system where Gvardiol was getting forward last year. As I said, Lewis is tucking into midfield as a right central midfielder. So if they want to bring Walker back in, and they want Gvardiol to push forward, they're going to have to switch back to the system of last year, where Gvardiol was essentially playing as a left winger, and they're not doing that this year. Because what they're doing is Lewis is going into midfield, but then they're playing two wingers very, very high and very, very wide. That was the position that Gvardiol was occupying last season. So what we're saying is, unless Pep wants to completely change his system, or unless he thinks someone like a Stones or a Kanji can do the exact role that Lewis is doing, then Lewis is going to continue to start. So that's why I've got him so high, because I don't see that Pep just all of a sudden, after 3 fairly successful games where City have looked pretty good, just suddenly completely changes the system to get Walker back in. So let's see what happens. As of right now, I would probably have Lewis on a wildcard, and I think he's a really good option. You've then got Leif Davis. I really like Davis. I've put him in fourth because objectively, there aren't many chances for clean sheets for Ipswich at all. They're not going to be a brilliant defence, and that's no disrespect to them. I think they'll score goals, and they will keep the odd clean sheet. But you have to say that you're not relying on them for clean sheets. And whilst his attacking threat for me looks exceptionally strong, I just think all of Quansah, Dunk, Lewis have more chances for clean sheets, as well as for some of them a little bit of attacking threat. So it really depends on what you want from a 4.5 defender. But I think especially if you've got, let's say you've already got Quansah, you've already got Dunk, and you're looking to add a third, well then, yeah, Davis could be a cheeky option that you could play in the slightly better fixtures. So I really like him, but I just think due to the lack of clean sheet potential, he's got to drop a little bit lower for me. I then have Robinson in 5th, and that's just because the fixtures are starting to run out for Fulham, and they're just not a good defence. They're not. They were 14th last year for XGC. In the opening 3, they've not kept a clean sheet against a relatively blunt United attack, and then also against Ipswich and Leicester. If they can't keep a clean sheet against Ipswich and Leicester, what makes me think that will happen in the future? They're just not defending overly well. And whilst Robinson does have the creativity, he's also not been that creative. I think he's 19th for expected assists out of all defenders this season. Yes, he's got 2 assists, but he's not creating a high quantity or quality of chances. So for me, Robinson's fine. But I feel like if you've not got him now, I'm not sure I'd be desperate to go out there and buy him. I've got Gay in 6th. I know people don't like Crystal Palace, but as I said when we discussed Eze earlier, fixtures overall aren't even that bad. And Palace aren't a bad defence. I'll continue to argue, even without Anderson, that they probably will keep clean sheets. And people won't be looking to invest in them now, but I don't actually mind a Mark Gay as an option. Colwill, I'd probably avoid Chelsea personally because I just think they're more a team that are going to score goals and concede goals. But their defensive data over the opening 3, considering they played against City in there, it's not been that bad, to be honest. So you could definitely do a lot worse than Colwill. And I've actually just chucked Emerson in there as 8th for West Ham. They've not got bad fixtures coming up now. They've obviously had some tricky ones to open with. And I don't think they'll be the best watertight defence. But I've also not seen too many signs that they are going to ship tons of goals. Obviously, City made them look like a weak defence. But that's what City do. And I know Villa had their chances. But I guess I don't think Emerson's an awful shout if you're looking and you don't like any of the 7 prior options. But for me, if I was on a wild card right now choosing 3 defenders fresh, it would be Konsa, Dunk, and one of Lewis or Davis. Would probably be the 3 that I would go for. A little bit boring, a little bit kind of safe and obvious, but for me, you want to target fixtures. You want to target a small chance for a clean sheet, attacking threat if you can get it, and those defenders there, combine some of those options. I'd love to know down below, which defenders do you favour at this price point at the moment? So I wanted to have a brief chat around Bukayo Saka because obviously a lot of people this week are looking to sell Saka, probably as part of a move for Salah. I think the most popular template, obvious thing to do in a lot of teams is Saka and Isak to Salah and João Pedro, especially if you can do it for free. Listen, I get it, and I don't hate that move. If that is the move that you're still considering, if you've not made it, or if you've made it, listen, it makes a lot of sense. You're bringing in 2 penalty takers in Salah and João Pedro, both with back-to-back home fixtures. You're getting the best captaincy option in Game Week 5 in Salah. And you're also switching to a structure which invests more money in your midfield, which overall isn't a bad thing. There are so many reasons to want to do that. You've got Isak and Saka who have 2 away fixtures. Everything points to that being a fine move. So I've got no issue with it. But I did just want to still discuss Saka, especially if someone's looking at something like a Saka to Palmer instead, and it's not to get Salah into your team. I do think it's trickier because Saka is just fantastic. And when I look at the next 2 fixtures, do I think they're great? No. But do I think Arsenal can still score goals? Yes, I absolutely do. And the thing for me, and this is the obvious point that I just want to drive home, you will want Bukayo Saka for Game Week 6. So let's not kid ourselves and say that we could go without, can we cover him with this player? Yeah, but if I've got Salah, you're going to want Saka from 6. And even if you don't think you do, my advice would be have Saka in Game Week 6. I would argue in Game Week 6 he may well be the best captaincy option. Even in Game Week 7, I know Haaland's got Fulham at home, but Saka could still be the best captaincy option. So if you're going to want Saka in 6, you're basically saying I'm either committing to a wildcard in 6, which is absolutely fine, or I'm having to use 2 transfers to take him out this week and then bring him back in. And if you value a transfer at, let's say, 4 points, I know sometimes it's not actually a 4-point hit, but I value a transfer at 4 points because that's what it is to take a hit. You're saying you're using 8 points to take out Saka and bring Saka back in. If he just gets 1 return in the next 2, even let's say he only gets you 1 goal, you're saying he's going to get, like, with the 8 points of transfers, like 15 points worth of stuff for your team over the next couple of weeks. Well, then you're saying that Salah has to come in and do very, very well. And I know people will say, well, it's not worth 4 points if I don't have to take a hit. I understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is you have to be pretty sure that the player you're bringing in is going to go very big. And or you have to be pretty sure that Saka is not going to do well. Now, I think something which has made selling Saka a lot better is that Declan Rice is suspended for the Spurs game, and Ødegaard looks like he's picked up a long-term serious injury. So if both Rice and Ødegaard are out of the Spurs game, and then they go into City, which by all accounts we're expecting to be low scoring based on previous encounters, it makes it a lot easier to sell. So I think based on everything, I have no issue with selling him. Just make sure that you've got a route back to him in 6 and that you're happy to buy him back. But If, like me, you're thinking, do you know what? I'm still tempted to keep him. There is a lot of promising stuff. Look how many touches he gets in the box. Look at that touch map. It's brilliant. He's got multiple points already. He is still on penalties. He's still on set pieces, especially the in-swinging corners. His goal threat so far this season has been brilliant. 0.46 non-penalty expected goals. He's still extremely creative with 0.23 expected assists per 90. 1.75 big chance involvement per 90 as well. He's almost involved in 2 big chances per 90. He could have had 2 or 3 returns against Brighton. Saka is absolutely a fine keep, and what that allows you to do is it makes sure that you are not committing to a Game Week 6 wildcard, and or you don't have to use 2 transfers on selling him and bringing him back in. So yeah, I don't think there's much more to say on it. I don't think you need me to sit here and say Saka is a good option, because we know that he is. It's just about planning out, when do you plan on wildcarding? Are you happy committing to a Game Week 6 wildcard? Because I think if you sell him, yeah, you can buy him back in, but it's just not optimal to use 2 transfers for that. So I think you're probably committing to a 6 wildcard, which is fine. But because I don't want to commit to a Game Week 6 wildcard, I'm looking at 7, 8, or even 12, which I'll discuss at the end of this video, why I think they could be good weeks to wildcard. If I'm not committing to that Game Week 6 wildcard, I'm thinking, could I get away with just keeping him for the next 2 and just hoping and praying? All you need is Arsenal to get a penalty, which, by the way, is completely feasible, and then he's going to get a return, or Arsenal to score from a corner and Bukayo Saka to be taking it. And then again, you may be happy you kept him because you've saved the transfers and you're getting yourself a return. So is not great to have him for the next 2. Would I rather Palmer and Salah? Yes, absolutely, especially Salah. And I think if your route to Salah is Saka, I'd sell him. I would. As long as it's for free, I would get Salah in for Saka in a heartbeat, because for the next 2, you'd prefer him. When you're talking about taking a hit for it, though, I think at that stage, taking a hit to remove a Saka and an Isak, who are both on penalties and both great options to bring in Salah, that starts to get a little bit trickier. I'll leave it there because I feel like that was an incredibly rambly section. Let me know what you're doing with Bukayo Saka. For now, I'm tempted to keep him, but if I could do him to Palmer for free, there is some temptation. So guys, I know we discussed this a few weeks ago, but lots of people still wondering, when do we wildcard? When should we play the chip? Especially as this week seems to be quite popular. So I've updated my thinking. I've looked into it in a bit more detail, because this is starting to get to the point where you almost do want to try and plan. And the reason you want to try and plan is because then you can really optimize when you use your transfers, which players you look to bring in. We just spoke about Saka. Selling Saka now, if you're looking to wildcard in 6, looks great. Whereas if you're thinking you're wildcarding in 12, well, then it maybe feels less great, because you're going to then have to bring him back in 6 with a free transfer or take a hit. So I really do think that over the next 1 to 2 weeks, ideally now would be great, but if not, by about Game Week 5, moving into 6, you really do need to think about when you want to wildcard, or at the very least, rule out a Game Week 6 wildcard. And just say, at the very earliest, I'm going to play it in 7 or 8. Maybe I'm looking towards something like a Game Week 12. In terms of why are people playing it this week, I'm seeing a lot of narrative that, oh, it means you've built a terrible team in Game Week 1, or it means that you don't know how to play FPL, or that you're not patient. People are basically making Game Week 4 wildcard sound terrible. I think it's fine. You've got 3 weeks worth of data, which no, isn't perfect, but it's enough to start drawing some conclusions. Lots of people want Salah and Haaland, which, based on getting 41 points each in the opening 3 game weeks, I'm finding it difficult to argue with, so that's fine. There are some fixture swings. There are notable fixture swings for the likes of Brighton and Liverpool going to 2 really good back-to-back home fixtures. And also, yes, you can fix some of the big mistakes and issues that you had in your team, like Quansah, Hall, Barco. Maybe you want to take out a couple of Newcastle options because you're tripled up. Maybe you do want to bring in Mohamed Salah and you feel like that was a mistake, or you want to jump on Trent or Robertson. There are lots of issues or mistakes that you might want to fix, yes, but it doesn't mean that you've had a stinker. I'm seeing lots of people wildcarding that are in a very good position with their team, but they want to attack and get more aggressive. So Game Week 4 is fine. It feels a little early for me because I still don't feel like I've got enough data to make really reliable decisions. So I would like to wait a little bit longer. And for me, the next best possible slot is Game Week 6. And this will be extremely popular, mainly due to Liverpool's fixtures starting to come to an end. And then Arsenal's fixtures are brilliant. Obviously, Leicester and Southampton at home, back-to-back in 6 and 7. City's fixtures start to improve from 6. They've got Newcastle in 6, but then Fulham in 7. So you're starting to see a nice run for City where you might want to have a Foden, but you're definitely going to want to have an Erling Haaland. And also teams like Brentford have really good fixtures. Newcastle's fixtures start to run out as well. So Game Week 6 does feel like a notable slot for fixture turns where it's like, yeah, do you know what? I can remove a lot of my team that start to have pretty tricky fixtures like Liverpool, Newcastle, and maybe even Brighton to some extent, and then bring in the likes of Arsenal and Man City. And Brentford. I do really like it. And also at this point, I think you can gain more of an understanding about which structure you want to run. Do you want to run a premium defense? Do you want to have Haaland and Salah, or only one of them? Do you want 2 or 3 premium midfielders? Do you want Saka and Palmer and maybe a Foden and then go weaker in defense? So I feel like Game Week 6 is a nice point in which you decide which structure do you want to run in the long term in terms of price points and the way that you put your team about. So Game Week 6, I think, will be very popular, and I think for good reason. It's actually not my favourite week to wildcard, though, at the moment. I think I prefer a Game Week 7 or a Game Week 8 wildcard. And the reason for that is if you're wildcarding in 7 or 8, the first thing is you can fix the mistakes from the Game Week 6 wildcard. And I'm not saying there definitely will be, but you guys will know, often when there's a popular wildcard window, we'll all pick a player or 2 players or 3 players that we think will be really good, and then the next week they're dropped, or the next week something happens. And I'll point back to Game Week 1, because Game Week 1 is essentially a wildcard, right? There were players like everyone jumped on Quansah, and he ended up not being a very good pick. Everyone had Barco, and he wasn't a very good pick. And I know these are things that it's more difficult to know in Game Week 1, but there will be mistakes that happen in Game Week 6 with the wildcard, or injuries, by the way. Just players that get injured in Game Week 6 that then you don't have to own in 7 and 8. So it's almost like a hedge against the Game Week 6 wildcard. It's assuming that there might be 1 or 2 things that you want to do differently. And as a result, you're almost a couple of transfers then ahead of the Game Week 6 wildcard. The flip side of it, the negative, is if obviously the Game Week 6 wildcard smashes it, which we've also seen in the past. Let's say it picks up like 20, 30 points above the average because they own, like, let's say Wissa and Mbeumo both score 2 goals. All of the Arsenal assets smash it, and you're sat there not with some of these players, then of course you could be behind. So it's a bit of a risk, but it's almost playing against the Game Week 6 wildcard. The other thing is, in Game Week 6, Liverpool play against Wolves away, which is still a pretty good fixture. So what you are able to do if you wildcard in 7 or 8 is you hold your Liverpool assets for 1 week more than those that wildcard in 6. Because I can guarantee those that wildcard in 6 probably won't have Trent, and they probably won't have Salah, and I probably don't think they'll have Jota or Diaz. So for those of us like myself sat there with 3 Liverpool, you might have 3 Liverpool in 6, whereas the wildcarders won't. So again, it's a little bit of a play against those wildcarding. And also, if you're wildcarding in 8 instead of 7, Arsenal's fixtures beyond Game Week 8 actually aren't that perfect, so I'll bring them up here. So they've got Leicester and Southampton at home in 6 and 7, then Bournemouth away in Game Week 8, but then in Game Week 9, 10 and 11, they've got Liverpool, Newcastle and Chelsea. So if you wildcard in Game Week 8, you could go with 2 Arsenal, potentially. Like maybe you don't want to go for a triple Arsenal because it's really those fixtures in 6 and 7 that are so good. So I hope you see what I'm saying here. It's almost like you're just, by shifting it only 1 or 2 weeks, you're differentiating yourself slightly. So if 6 appears so popular that you want to be a bit different, I don't mind 7 or 8. And also if you go in Game Week 8, it is post-international break again. So if you can delay it until 8, you have that international break to decide what you want to do with your team and have a little bit more time to think about it, and also deal with any injuries and issues once again in the international break, which of course will continue to crop up. So I actually think at the moment my favourite wildcard window is Game Week 7 or 8. The only other week that is a potential option is Game Week 12 for me. There's a lot of fixture swings. And I think based on the teams that we'll own from Game Week 8 to Game Week 11, a lot of them start to have really tricky fixtures in 12, and a lot of the teams that we don't have any cover for start to have some really nice ones. So I just think this is a good week if you're looking at your team around Game Week 6, 7, 8. Maybe you've already got Haaland and Salah. Maybe you've got a Saka in place. You've got an Arsenal defender. Maybe you find it very easy to get a Wissa or an Mbeumo in. You might be looking at it just thinking, I've already got 2 Arsenal. I've already got Salah in place. I've got Haaland. I don't need to bring him in. I actually don't think I need a wildcard between 6 and 8. Well, don't force it. You don't need to. And then something like a Game Week 12 wildcard could work very well. Also, like I said, you can fix mistakes from previous ones. So by the time Game Week 12 comes around, Game Week 6 wildcard is like 6 or 7 weeks old at that point. That is when issues start to really crop up. Like you are quite a long way away from when you've previously wildcarded. So everyone else will be looking at their team probably around Game Week 12 and thinking, I'd love another wildcard. And you might be able to just come in there and smash it at that point. So listen, it is extremely team dependent. As boring as that is to say, it really depends on what your team looks like right now. But for me, this week is fine. But I think 6, 7 and 8 will be extremely popular. And for most teams, that is probably the point that makes the most sense. But don't feel forced into 6 if 7 or 8 works better for you. Then Game Week 12 is fine. And by the way, you can play your first wildcard all the way up until Game Week 19. So if you want to save it until right up just before that busy Christmas period and play it then, that also works. So hopefully that helps you come to your own decision. And I would love to know down below, what is your tentative plan for when you're looking to wildcard? So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 4 preview. Hopefully it has been helpful for you. And if it has, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. And as I said at the start of the video, make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. Currently 50% off to get access to all of the brilliant stuff that I use in my videos. I really do appreciate their support, and I would appreciate your support by checking them out. But until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.